Hello, I am Enrique Barra, and in this video we are going to see how to connect our React and Redux applications with backend services. Well, most applications, most client applications, will need to communicate with a backend, with a service, just to get data or interchange data with it. For example, to consume third-party information that is stored in another service or in another place, to manage persistence, to send data to be saved in a database, for example, to share information with other clients in a chat application, and many other use cases. How can we do that? Well, this is usually done with the HTTP protocol, with the XML HTTP request that the browsers provide, or easily with a library like Axios that is very used for this purpose. It wraps this interface or other interface and provides very easy to use methods and functions to perform or implement this functionality. Or finally, using the new fetch API, the HTML5 API with this fetch method. I leave you here the URLs. There are other possibilities and they are easy to use. Well, how do we do this in React? Well, in React and Redux we will enhance our state to indicate the app state related with the fetch. What is happening in our application? Well, we will add a fetching, a finished, and an error variables in our state, just to indicate what is happening. Let's see how it works. In the first place, we perform the request, the Ajax call, and then in the status we set fetching to true. In our app, when we re-render, we check it, and if fetching is true, we say loading or a spinner or whatever. Why? Because we send the request and still has no response. So we set loading and the user waits for it. If we get a 200 OK and we get the data, we set fetching to false and finished to true. And in that case, in the render, we will show our application. And if there is an error, we set fetching to false, finished to true, because we have finished, and the error message, we save it in the status also. And if we have an error message, we show it to the user for it to try again or to try later or whatever. Well, this is how we are going to use this state in React and Redux. In React, if we don't have Redux, we will do the fetching usually in the component did mount. You can use other methods, but it's usually done here. Never, never, never use it in the render method, because the render is the method in charge to modify the user interface, but it will never access the DOM, it will never set timeouts, it will never perform calls. The call will be done in the component did mount, and after the call we will do a set state. For example, look here. In the component did mount, you do a fetch to a URL. When you get the response, you get the JSON from it, and then you set a new state, and if you set a state, everything will be re-rendered. Okay? You can do a little bit more complex. This is just a very simple example. Okay? What happens if we have Redux architecture? Well, we will need to create new actions, but more complex actions. Remember, the actions are just plain JavaScript objects, but in this case we will need actions that delay or do async operations. For that, fortunately, we have a middleware, a library that is called Redux Thunk. It is very easy to install, just npm as always, and just 3 considerations about Redux Thunk. It's a middleware that will allow the action creators, instead of returning just a plain JavaScript object, to return a function. This function will receive dispatch and get state as parameters, and we will be able to delay the dispatch or to dispatch only if we have certain conditions. Let's see a couple of examples to understand it better. This action creator is increment asynchronously. So it will return, instead of a JavaScript object, a dispatch. a function. A function that receives this dispatch and will, in a second, in 1000 milliseconds, will dispatch the increment action. So this is not a plain JavaScript object, but a function. So this action will return a function that in fact what it's doing is, in 1 second, will dispatch another action. And this other example will increment, is another action that will increment if odd. So if the counter is even, return, and if it is odd, dispatch an increment. So we can perform a condition or do an async operation, thanks that we have this Redux Thunk integrated in our application. How we integrate it? Well, install it with npm, and then just import it and modify the create store into, of course, in the Redux provider. How? In the create store, just as a third param, we have the enhancers. So we add here Thunk. Previously we had another enhancers, but now we add Thunk. For that we also remember that have apply middleware and compose. Okay, so these two things will integrate Thunk in our application. Well, what are the steps to do all that we think that we have to do to introduce Ajax calls or backend services calls? Well, in the first place, install Redux Thunk, integrate it, as we saw, modifying the Redux provider. We will have to create new fetch actions. We will have to modify our application to perform this call with a new prop, and in the component did mount, we will dispatch this fetch. We will modify the reducers to add a new reducers to treat this part of the state, and finally, in our application, we will consider the different state as we saw, while we are fetching or finished or an error, just to show it. Okay, so these are the steps that we have to do to integrate backend calls into our application. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.